My name is Diona Williams, and I actually teach at Tohono Community College. I'm the full-time faculty, and I teach early childhood education courses. And when I'm not hanging out with college students, I'm hanging outdoors with young children. I have a program called Outback Learning, and it is a home-based, nature-based preschool program, and it's part-time. When I'm not doing any of those two things, I'm spending time with my family. It's been a very interesting year because the way we typically spend time is traveling. But in this past year, we spent a lot of time cooking together, outdoor walks in our neighborhood, and we're getting ready to do some, I would say, like midsummer gardening and trying to connect back with family that we haven't seen in a while. So I've been in early childhood for about 20 years now. And I would say I've been doing early childhood work in the state of Arizona since 2009, kind of off and on. I would say for a long time, my parents definitely considered me to be like a free spirit. I initially was an art, like a graphic design major in college, which is kind of funny to think about. Still use those skills today, but honestly, growing up as a military child, I had the opportunity to get my babysitter card. And so I started babysitting kids basically at the age of 11. And those of you that are Air Force brats or military or Army kids, you'll know that oftentimes kids need care in the summertime. So those of us that had our CPR first aid license, we were able to babysit young children during the summer. And so I started working with kids, I feel like at a very young age, but it wasn't until I was in my freshman year of college that I realized that I probably had the wrong major and I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And that's when I discovered early childhood education through one of the local community colleges in San Antonio. Being a military child, there's always been options of home-based providers or childcare centers. But most importantly, I would say I was really inspired by my Nana who raised, I would say raised kids, but she was a home-based provider in New York City. And so every time I would visit her, that's what I would basically connect with all what we call the chickadees. Um, so I always knew that I could be a home-based provider. I just never heard or knew about this concept of outdoor education with young children until about 4 years ago through the Summer Institute. And so the Summer Institute inspired Outback Learning because I had already had that early childhood background as far as administrative things. I knew it was a matter of just really flipping my mindset from being indoors to being completely outdoors. So a typical day in the Outback, the sheltered, I'm air quoting, the sheltered part of the program, my husband and I converted the garage over. So that's where we have the indoor part of the program. And the backyard, the Outback part, is where the kids are able to do some gardening out back and then also just engaging with nature as if they were in their own homes. And then the extended part of Outback is that we do what we in the nature-based world, they would say like taking a nature walk. I call them neighborhood walks because it's more of a place-based type of a program. And so we have the indoor part, the outer layer would be the Outback, and then the extended part of the program is actually walking the neighborhood. And that's a big deal because the kids are able to connect with nature. As far as the parents are concerned, I felt like I just spent a lot of time just trying to help them understand the concept of the program and how they could take these same ideas and concepts and do it at home with their kids. One of my favorite stories is one of the Outbackers talked about one of the parents shared with me that they had converted their sandbox into a garden. The fact that one of the Outbackers had relocated to Alaska and grew a sunflower seed that I had given them during the program, I found that to be really fascinating. Or just hearing parents talk about, I could actually send my kids outside for an extended period of time and they feel comfortable. They don't feel bored. They're climbing trees. They have a desire to garden, or they're starting to recognize different patterns and leaves. The program is rooted in the community. it is rooted in a neighborhood. And the whole point of it is I want children and families to be able to take what they're learning in Outback and do it in their own homes. They don't have to leave their community to experience nature. I want families and children to feel like they can be connected with nature in their community. And this is a big thing in urban areas. Oftentimes, people think that there's no nature in urban areas, and there's lots of nature in urban areas. And as far as nature and play or nature base, according to Rachel Lattimore in her textbook, I like her definition. The idea is that you're connecting early childhood education and environmental education together. And everything that you're doing in your program is rooted in nature. So, from the administrative approach to your teaching approaches, everything is based out of nature. Don't have to plan every single thing, and it can be very child centered, based off of whatever they're engaging with in nature. There's just more than one way of learning. When I was still working in public education, I remember I had a professional tell me, she said I had the worst two preschool classes in the entire program. I was like, wow, what a great badge of honor, you know. I was just left with a huge challenge, with children, just with challenging behaviors, challenging needs. And I was an early childhood special ed teacher. And after having a really rough semester, I just remember having a conversation with my paraprofessional. I said, listen, we're not going to do what we did from August to December. I have been studying this outdoor education and early childhood, and I want to incorporate it. And I feel like she gave me her blessing in a lot of ways, just really trusting me at that point. And then I sat down with our other specialty providers that work with our kids as well. And I said, this is what I want to do. On the days that you all are coming into my classroom, it's going to be the day that we will be outside. And I'm telling you, I had less calls to the principal's office, less professionals coming into my classroom because I had children not having meltdowns. It changed everything about how I looked at the social emotional needs of children. I felt like in my years of working in behavioral health, we always talked about mindfulness, but because of my role, I could never see it actually implemented. So being a teacher and actually seeing like this mindfulness stuff works, I knew it worked, but seeing it with my own eyes, it was game changer. Seeing the kids garden, their sensory needs, like just their entire beings were so much calmer simply because we were outside connecting with nature. I feel like I have a lot of memories as a young child taking walks. We would walk the neighborhood or we would walk to a local park. I barely remember the indoors, but I just remember playing in the sand, eating the sand. I remember the bark that was outside, but I just remember the different textures that I was touching at that particular time. And then I just think as I got older, my parents always found a way. Like it was just very important for us to be outside. Having a bike and being able to ride the neighborhood was a big deal. My one grandmother was in the South, so in South Carolina, just watching her in her garden. And then with my Nana, it was a lot different because she lived in the city. Even just standing outside on the terrace was just like something nice to do because she lived in an apartment building. She always had like all of these plants outside on her terrace. And I didn't really think of the value of it until now as an adult and doing this type of work. I would say to a parent, what are you actually comfortable with in nature? Because what I find with children, they're going to be comfortable with whatever you're comfortable with, and more than likely, they just want to go outside. And it's usually the adults that are like, I don't know, it's too cold, it's too rainy, it's too hot. But what does the parent or caregiver feel comfortable with? It's not about them making them feel bad that they've never done this before. It's about making the experience comfortable for them I think the first step is making the decision and then just being in the space. Like even if you don't have if you're not close to a park, but maybe you have a neighborhood or you're living in an apartment complex, can you walk around your apartment complex? Also read to kids outside. Um, that was something I really leaned into when I was still working in public education. But I started really, really small because I recognized that the kids that I was working with, some of them didn't have those outdoor experiences. And so to say we were just going to be outside for 2.5 hours was just not realistic. But we could start out with, okay, after we have our recess time, I'm going to add an extra 10 minutes and I'm going to read a story to them. Or we're just going to sit and talk or just have a picnic, just sitting there and just observing, like, well, what do you see? And they would just talk about what they were seeing outside. I've had this conversation recently with an early childhood educator. I said, well, in your program, the kids are required to go outside, I'm sure through licensing. And she said, yes. And so I just asked her, what is their experience to connect with nature? If they're not on the playground, what is something intentional that you could do for them to connect with nature? And part of that conversation was helping her think about how she connected as a child. And then what does she do as an adult? So I think as an educator, it's just like, what is something you can intentionally do to connect them to the natural environment around them? I'm just thinking about the last playground and the last campus I was at. When I started to think about it more intentionally, all of a sudden I just realized there was nature all around us besides the playground. Looking at the playground, I'm like, we have a pine cone tree, even though we had turf and we had peat rock, but we had a pine cone tree that also had pine needles. We had a sandbox, but that was just one part of campus. When I started really looking at the campus, I said, wait a minute, we have a rose garden too with a peach tree. So when I started to become more intentional and thinking about how can I connect them, that's when the ideas started to come together. Think about the resources you already have on site and how they can connect with nature where you're at. My daughter is 12, she's in the 7th grade. My family thinks that my parents and everyone else, they think we have a farm. And they think we have a farm because we have 3 chickens. And I think it's funny because I'm like, it's literally 3 chickens. But a year ago this time, after lots of convincing with my better half, he grew up in the country of Leesville, Louisiana. So he grew up with like chickens and animals and lots of gardening and fishing and hunting. And so with Outback, I knew it was something I wanted to incorporate was chickens, but I was still kind of iffy about it. And my daughter and I were just like, can we just get the chickens? And so, of course, he buckled and said yes. And so he's like, look at this, the 2 city chicks raising chickens. And the rest was history. We raised them from baby chicks, and they are known as the city chicks. My daughter, as I said, it's really interesting having her find ways to connect with nature. And the chickens is one of them. I mean, I'm not going to lie, the city chicks has been a big part of her making that connection with nature in the outdoors. She has written a podcast about them, and we have some really exciting projects coming out regarding the city chicks. But the city chicks definitely connected us during a really tough time where we're all home together, which thankfully we all love each other and like being around each other, but they just provided us with a different source of entertainment and just really understanding how to take care of them and what it really means, like what they're providing to us as far as their eggs and just that whole circle of life. It's really interesting. And I'm really excited for when Outback opens in the fall and the kids can see, like, oh my gosh, there's chickens and they have eggs, and being able to share that with future Outbackers and their families. it really gets me excited because it's just been a big part of my family and definitely has impacted my daughter for sure. Sometimes she'll just sit out back and just watch them as they're just walking around the yard and just like looking for worms and grub and whatever else that they're doing in the yard. But it just gives her a sense of peace that I don't think I've ever seen her ever have until we had the chickens. I definitely think it's impacted her social emotional development in a very positive way. And I think that's why she takes passion in just writing the stories about them, more recently just sketching them. She's an artist, she's a writer, she's all those things, but it's that emotional connection that she has with them. I'm not trying to promote like everybody go out and get chickens, but I just can say for her, especially being an only child, it just gave her something to look forward to during a time when we couldn't do anything. Children have the right to nature, to connect with nature, whether it's within their communities, within their programs, but they have the right to just experiencing nature around them and having access to it. I think they have the right to advocate that they want these types of programs. I think educators have the right to make those types of decisions because they know what's best for the children that they're working with. And I hope that more educators feel empowered to explore the different programs that are out there so they can advocate it and have it at their center to expand more of an inclusive environment. I think if all early childhood educators had the knowledge and had the experience, but primarily just gaining the knowledge on how they can introduce the concept, then I feel like it can become more equitable. Don't be afraid to just get outside. Whatever you define as connecting with nature, I think is the most important piece and not what everyone else may tell you on how you need to connect.